Welcome to the original and the best Power Hour with Alex Burr and Dylan Hughes, members and podcast of the Running Hook Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Alex and Dylan Basketball Power Hour. I'm once again joined by my co-host Dylan Hughes. Dylan, you saw the shot Luka hit last night. I would just like to know, in the tradition of throwing curveballs when you're expecting fastballs, how many times would you have to take that shot before you hit it?
Okay, if it was in a practice, I think I could hit it pretty early on because, and listen, you have seen me play basketball firsthand. And I will defend myself in saying that Zach Griffith's court is not regulation. Okay, there's a little slant in there. Like you got the one of the corners is just right up against a bunch of bushes, and it's definitely not the same length. So listen, my 3-point shot was as cold as it could get. It was awful, and I have those stretches where the in-game shooting is not there. And so I talk a lot of shit before the game about how good my shot is. And then all of a sudden when I have to prove it, it sucks. But if you watch me before the game or after the game, it doesn't matter. Either one, as long as it doesn't count, that's when I start hitting. But I mean, I could throw up some crazy shots and they'll go in. So I think I could give myself 5 shots and it's going in.
5. Wow.
But it has to be when it doesn't matter. The no pressure situation is where I thrive.
So Dylan Hughes, you're basically admitting to America that you are in fact a choker. You can't live up to the spotlight. That's basically what you're saying, Dylan Hughes. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
You gotta love a man who's confident enough to admit that he has faults and is a choker. This must be the first time in recorded human history that someone has admittedly called themselves a choker. Wow. I'll take 50 attempts to hit that, because just the leaning forward aspect of it. Like, did you see that one angle? He was almost like parallel to the ground. It was crazy. One of the craziest shots I've ever seen. It was frankly one of the luckiest shots I've ever seen. I don't care how much you say you practice it. Like, okay. Jalen Suggs shot, yeah, it's plausible. You're taking a lot of half-court shots in practice, whatever. Why would you go out of your way to practice a leaning in floater from the left wing? Why? That just doesn't make sense to me, Dylan Hughes.
Well, I will say that Rick Carlisle was interviewed, and he said he doesn't bet Luka anymore on making shots because he always makes them. So I wouldn't put it past Luka to just be sitting in the gym all day practicing crazy stuff like that.
You know what I think? I know I've railed against Larry Bird comparisons on this podcast before. He might be the Larry Bird of this generation in that he hits the craziest bullshit anyone's ever seen. I think that might be the way he's the successor to Larry Bird. Not in like, he's white, he grabs a lot of rebounds, scores a lot of points, gets a lot of assists. No, he just hits the craziest fucking shots, and we just have to be like, all right, it went in. And at some point, listen, we all agree Luka's a very good player, but I don't think he practiced it. I just don't think he went out of his way to practice that shot.
Well, you can believe what you want to believe, Alex.
That's, they do call me the hater du jour. Let's get on to the podcast, though. It was a riveting discussion, Dylan. That was a very riveting discussion we just had. That's why I don't like to ask you those questions before we start the pod. But there's a lot of stuff that happened in the NBA this week, a lot of it, and 2 injuries are 2 things we aren't probably going to talk about a whole lot. I just want to mention Zach LaVine is going to miss about 10 to 14 days being in the health and safety protocols. And that's going to be huge for the Bulls. They're kind of in a tailspin. The other one I kind of want to mention, and Dylan, I'll let you touch on this one for a sec. James Wiseman tore his meniscus. He's going to be out for the rest of the season. So it's a tough break for the rookie just to be out for the rest of the season the way that he's going to be. Like, I feel bad for James Wiseman.
Yeah, he's had a tough go at it this year. And I mean, the Warriors are very clearly better when Kevon Looney's on the floor. And once he got healthy, that became very, very clear. But, you hate to see a rookie get hurt because, this is the learning phase for him. And whether he sucks or not, this would be a good time to start figuring some stuff out. And I mean, he got the majority of the season in, which is good, but either way, it's tough to have a knee injury, especially early on like this.
Yeah, I hope that he has a speedy recovery and that I hope he doesn't do the quick fix meniscus tear because that's wrecked a lot of guys' careers. Like I think Russell Westbrook had the quick fix one way back when he tore his meniscus and he came back for the playoffs, and that might explain a lot of things, Dylan Hughes. But the real injury we got to talk about is Jamal Murray against the Warriors. They were down 7, goes up in the paint, trying to fight their way back, get it to 5, and he is grabbing his knee, and it turns out next morning he's torn his left ACL, and obviously will be out for the rest of this season. And there's a really good possibility he's out till the playoffs next year, because in a normal NBA calendar, playoffs are starting today, right about now. So we were kind of talking about this before the pod. Dylan, you don't think this will have as big of an impact as maybe I think it will. What kind of impact do you think the Jamal Murray injury will have on the Nuggets?
Well, the thing that's lucky for the Nuggets is they happen to have one of the best backup point guards in the league in Monte Morris, and a guy that has already gotten a lot of playoff experience. So I don't think that, at least you're not dropping down to some scrub having to fill in starting unit minutes. Like, you have a very reliable backup guard. The problem is, after getting Aaron Gordon, the Nuggets were, to me at least, a finals contender. Especially with the way the Lakers have been dealing with injuries right now. You never know, what it's going to look like later on in the season for them. And when the Nuggets have 2 all-star level guys and then 2 other guys that are just awesome off-ball presences, I thought they had a really good shot at getting to the finals. And especially the way Murray played last year in the playoffs. He's what really got them over the edge in that Utah series. And without that, they wouldn't have made it to the West Finals. So he's definitely a huge loss, and he definitely lowers their offensive ceiling quite drastically, I would say. But thanks to that Aaron Gordon injury, I still think that they are very well suited to make a good impact in the postseason. And again, I don't want to rely on Michael Porter Jr. so much, but he just continues to have these games where you just can't, you can't doubt what he can do. It's just that he doesn't always bring it all the time. But he's just such a great fit next to Jokic. He's seriously such an ideal type of player offensively. He's a great rebounder. He's a very good shooter, and he's just huge. He makes life really easy for Jokic. And then you got Aaron Gordon, who's not as good of a shooter, but he's a better defender, good cutter. So you have 2 very tall men that have a lot of length and can do a lot on, both ends of the floor, more so Gordon on defense. But I still think they have a good team. It's probably not elite level anymore, but I still think they're fine.
Yeah, I guess you could kind of piecemeal together the production, right? I feel like Gordon, I think we both agree Gordon's a good passer, and Gordon and Morris can probably make up for the assist production that you might lose from Murray, although Murray is no one's idea of a true point guard. But the scoring is just where it's going to hurt the most, because he just, to me, every time I watch the Nuggets this year, and going back to last playoffs even, and this is the consistent improvement that you and I have both been jonesing for Murray for a while, is that he's finally doing it. He's doing it off ball, right? He's doing it on ball. The elements of production that Jamal Murray can bring to you scoring wise, there aren't a lot of guards who have his skill set where it's both complementary and you can be the lead ball handler for stretches. There's not a lot of people that can replicate that skill, right? Michael Porter Jr. is probably one of the best off-ball players in the league on offense. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but he probably is, right? He's averaging 18 and 8 this year, basically, on 54% shooting from the field. So he's been ridiculous on offense, and the step forward has been needed. or the step forward he's taken has been very needed, especially now. They're going to need him to be more on ball creation. And I listen, I'm not doubting Michael Porter's talents. I think he's one of the most talented players in the league. I've been on the record as saying this, but if he can put it all together and be off the dribble, create shots for them, I think they can. Hell, I still think they can make the finals, but it's going to be a lot harder without Jamal Murray. I think that the West this year has been really in flux, right? Like we're going to find out how much we believe in the Jazz later. And I don't think either of us really believe in the Suns that much. And the Lakers haven't been healthy. So that leaves really the Nuggets and the Clippers, ironically, as the two most dependable teams in the playoffs right now. So in the playoff picture. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shapes out for the Nuggets, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to completely doubt them as a finals contender. It's just, I think it lowers their chances. But as many good teams as there are in the West, I mean, there's a lot of issues with really every team. And, you know, it's going to be really interesting to watch how after the first round of the playoffs, I feel like we'll have a decent idea of what's going to happen. But I mean, it just hinges on the Lakers to me, because I still think a healthy Lakers team is the best team in the West. But hell, their two best players are out. I mean, what can you do? And I mean, the good thing for them is Schroeder and Drummond, at least regular season wise, like that's not a bad top two, you know, like they can tread enough water to be fine. But obviously in the playoffs, that's not going to last. And even if you just have one of those guys hobbled, especially if it's LeBron though, and LeBron's been Superman to this point. So it's going to be interesting to see how he recovers from a high ankle sprain. And like a high ankle sprain is not anything to mess around with, no matter who you are. Some of those things take months, and it still gives him plenty of time to get back, you know, before it gets too late. But, you know, he may have to step back a little bit and play a little bit more stationary. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for sure.
He'll be finally in like the late stage Magic Johnson portion of his career where he just takes his ass to the block every single time and just creates from there. I mean, Frank Vogel, real quick aside, coach of the year candidate. Like the Lakers have been 6-7 without LeBron and AD. And that's not a small thing. Like they've been playing real teams. It's not like they've been playing the Thunder every time out, right? Like shout out to the Thunder, who are currently on an 8-game losing streak. And that streak will probably balloon in the next 2 weeks. The Lakers have been playing really well. And okay, this is a good time as any to announce this. We are going to skip the Rockets, the Magic, and the Lakers for our last time through. Lakers, because we want to get a good big picture view of the teams before we go into the playoffs. And the way this Lakers season is going, we're probably not going to get that during the regular season. It's probably going to come in the first round. And then the Rockets and the Magic kind of goes without saying. What else is there to say about Kelly Olynyk, right? Except that he's a dirty fucking player. Ayo. But I think that those teams we're going to skip. But for the Nuggets, right now the 4-5 would be Nuggets Lakers. And if LeBron and AD both aren't all the way back, I think that's huge, because one of the things that was really successful for the Lakers against the Nuggets last year was Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard was the key to that series, in my opinion. Not JaVale, not anyone else. Dwight Howard, because Dwight, for everything that people say about him, he is still one of the best athletes in the history of the NBA and is still one of the best athletes in the NBA currently. Yes. Did he maybe do some Bill Laimbeer tactics to Jokic? Possibly. But he held Jokic in check. Him and AD helped hold Jokic in check. And if you have half AD and you have no Dwight, I think there's a good chance the Nuggets can eliminate the Lakers in the first round.
Yeah, that would be the best chance for the Nuggets, and the standings are still fluid, but if that ends up like that, I mean, the Nuggets, because even if the Lakers are healthy, are they really going to be healthy? I mean, you know, again, you're going to have your two best players just coming off injury, likely within you know, just a couple weeks. And sometimes it takes more than a couple weeks to get back. So if they're able to take the Lakers out round one, all of a sudden their pathway gets a lot easier.
And the playoffs gets a lot more interesting because then you have all the teams, you have the prospective favorite off the board. The Clippers have been on fire lately. They're currently they're right outside of 2. So actually, I don't have the actual NBA standings pulled up, but they're not very far behind Utah either. So it's really right now, Utah, Phoenix, and Clippers are 1, 2, and 3. And then Denver and LA are right by each other at 4 or 5. And then Dallas is a game back of Portland for 6. So it's going to be real interesting playoff race the rest of the season. San Antonio is 10th, like we probably could have predicted. They've been really bad lately. So the Western Conference playoffs is going to be fascinating. But speaking of the San Antonio Spurs, this is a good time I need to transition to LaMarcus Aldridge had an irregular heartbeat in the last game that he played on April 10th. And today he announced he is retiring from the NBA. Dylan Hughes, we have been harsh in our coverage of LaMarcus this year, but it had nothing to do, with any off the court stuff. He wasn't as good as he used to be, but Dylan Hughes, LaMarcus Aldridge, very good player. Sad to see him leave the NBA, even in his depleted state.
Yeah, man. I mean, he was, and we talked about him. I probably was last week or 2 weeks ago when he went to the Nets. I mean, he's been one of the best. He was one of the best players of the 2010s. Like he's making one of those all NBA teams. I mean, he was one of the best power forwards, if not the best, for a good handful of years. And it's kind of sad it didn't work out as much in San Antonio as we thought. When he went there, I mean, it seemed like he was going to be like the next Tim Duncan. At least that's what San Antonio wanted, and it just didn't work out that way. And of course, it didn't help that Kawhi ended up leaving. But yeah, it's sad. And I actually wanted to see it through with Brooklyn, because as much as we criticized that, I thought he actually played fine. He was actually playing decent at center. He was protecting the rim pretty well. So I was actually kind of excited to see how that played out. But obviously he made the best decision for himself. And I mean, I was just talking to my friend about this the other day about how hearts are very hard to figure out. And these things can pop up very randomly. And a lot of times it's hard to detect. And as soon as that pops up, man, you got to realize that you could be close to something big. So playing in the NBA is obviously a very taxing thing for your body. And especially as a big guy, having to take all that beating down low. So obviously has to retire. I mean, no one can blame it. And he went to the hospital for it too. It's not like it was just oh, my heart's feeling weird, I'm going to retire. It's a very serious thing. So, I'm happy he was able to make it this far without having any bad problems with his heart. And hopefully moving forward, they're able to keep that under control.
Yeah, I would just like to shout out the 2014-15 or the 2013-14 Portland Trailblazers team. One of my favorite teams of all time. I don't know why I was so attached to this team. They were on TNT a lot. That might be the reason why. And I stayed up late a lot. But they had Dame, Wes Matthews, Nick Batum, Aldridge, and Robin Lopez as their starting 5. And those guys all led the league in minutes as a starting 5 because they had no bench behind them. But LaMarcus was just automatic from the mid-range, right? Even in the later years, you couldn't criticize him for shooting 2s because, yes, he probably should have shot more 3s, right? But even he was making 50% of his long 2s. It doesn't matter. He legitimately, behind Dirk and Chris Paul is probably he was in the top 3 of mid-range shooters of the last decade. And you're right. I'd probably have him on my second team all 2010s. He was that good. He led Portland to a lot of success and then got to San Antonio and helped lead them to a lot of success. So he was very good throughout the whole lot. If you're good for 9 of the 10 years of a decade, you've accomplished something. And I think that it's going to suck because I think we're going to forget about LaMarcus Aldridge because a lot of people wouldn't appreciate the nuances in his game, but he, to me, is an integral. You can't tell the story of the 2010s. You have to mention LaMarcus somewhere, right? Him and Dame took down a Rockets team with the burgeoning James Harden and then Dwight Howard, who was still pretty much in his prime. And LaMarcus ate those Rockets for lunch in 2014. I think in the first 2 games, he combined for almost 90 points. like he was unstoppable in those games. And it's going to suck because no one's going to remember him because, like, I mean, how many people remember Joe Johnson? Joe Johnson and LaMarcus Aldridge basically had the same. Funny enough, Joe Johnson's trying to come back. And if a team signs him out, I'll be shocked. But LaMarcus Aldridge to me, just one of the most entertaining players. For me, at least. I know his game wasn't for everybody, but I just loved watching that mid-range jumper going every single time.
Well, power forwards that shoot mid-range jumpers, that's my love language right there. So that's my guy, man. I grew up on LaMarcus Aldridge, so I think his career was definitely spoiled a little bit by the past couple of years in San Antonio, where it was just very clear that he wasn't really working out there anymore. But still had an excellent career.
It sucks that he has to go out this way, but at least he went out in his terms, and at least he's, in good health. So that's really all we can hope for. Let's awkwardly segue out of that into our teams for the week. So in case you need a reminder, we did switch our teams. So if you came into this expecting the Bucks, apologize, but we're here talking about Dylan Hughes' Indiana Pacers instead. We'll talk about them second. First up, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then last we have the Utah Jazz. So let's go ahead with the Cavs. They are currently 20-34. They are sixth in lottery odds at this moment in time. This is important to note this time of year as teams are fighting for lottery odds. So last Thursday, they absolutely destroyed the Oklahoma City Thunder, who again are admired in an 8-game losing streak, 129-102. They then got their brakes blown off of them by the Raptors, 135-115. Got beaten by the Pelicans in a very short-handed game for the Cavs. That's very damning for the Pelicans, 116-109. And then last night they defeated the Charlotte Hornets 103-90. So Dylan Hughes, before we get to our big picture questions, you notice anything different this time watching the Cavs from the first time we watched them?
Okay. I have an obscure comment. I can't let it go.
Oh no. Is this
this is tough for me to say because he's a good player. He's done good things this week that I watched. But I just get so distracted. I was having a tough time staying focused because I was just so fascinated watching Dean Wade move. This dude, I'm sorry, he moves like a weirdo. He runs like he just learned how to run recently. He's very tall and his back is very straight when he runs. His arms are always kind of down and he more shuffles than runs. He takes very short, choppy steps and he never stops moving, which is usually something I would be happy about. But it's he's just moving to move. There's not really a lot of intention behind it. And watching him move around is just it's just very odd. And it's just something that stuck out to me.
I should have known you would have Dean Wade thoughts. I should have. He does stick out like a sore thumb on a game. It doesn't help when him and Kevin Love are in at the same time because they kind of look similar. And they're the same height. I mean, Love is a little bit bigger, obviously, but when they're, shuffling their feet on defense, you can't really tell the weight difference there. But Dean Wade's kind of good. I think that he's an interesting young prospect, but let's go ahead.
I mean, yeah, again, it's tough for me to criticize the dude when he's knocking down threes like no one's business. But, and also another Cavs thing real quick. I always get a little bit nervous when you got 3 white guys on the floor because, and listen, the Pacers, you could have the same conversation. Trust me. But the Cavaliers at any time could put Dellavedova out there, Dean Wade, Kevin Love, Isaiah Hartenstein. It's way too much Caucasian, man. And I think it speaks volumes to some of the Cavs issues.
We didn't even see Dylan Windler this week, Dylan Hughes.
If you can run a full 5-team squad of white boys, you need to go to college. Just relegate yourself to college for a week and then come back to us.
There was way too much Delly in the games that I watched, but Sexton hasn't played the last 2 games. Yeah. I don't know exactly what he's at with at the moment, but Garland played last night and I thought he played well. And that'll lead me to my first big picture question, Dylan Hughes. Can Colin Sexton and Darius Garland make it in the league together? They're both slight. They're both, I would say they're both electric. I think they're both really good. But do you think that they can both make it together playing in the league?
Well, here's what I look for nowadays. Are you a team that has two creators? That's the starting point I need. If you look at every single good team in the league, they have two creators, off the dribble guys. They can get their own shot or they can get a shot for someone else. And that's what you get in those two guys. And sure, like the defense, you're going to have issues maybe, but I think you can build around that. I mean, we talk about guard defense a lot on this pod. Like, it just doesn't really matter that much anymore. If you surround them with good wings that can defend and someone that can protect the rim, which they have in Jarrett Allen, like, you're fine. And I just like watching both of these guys. They are good at creating. The one thing I am concerned about is they're better at creating for themselves than others. Like, Garland is definitely more of like a Kyrie type of guy, I'd say. He's a guy that's really good at getting his own shot. As far as creating for others, it may take him some time to develop that. And I think Sexton's getting better with the passing, but he's definitely still kind of like a head down to the basket type of guy. So that I'm a little bit interested to see if they're able to work together when they're both kind of shoot first type of guys. But I mean, I have no problem having 2 point guards together. I think that's actually good in today's league. So I'm bullish on that duo.
Yeah, I think they could work, but I think you need a lot of defense behind you, right? I think so. Okay. So obviously I said they're 6th in the lottery odds. If they jump into the top 4, and let's just say they miss out on the first pick and the first team selects Cade Cunningham, this team is in desperate need of an Evan Mobley kind of guy. Like just a guy with some like hell, I know you say don't draft for need, but they don't need another guard. Like, they either need a wing or a big. And I think if they could get Cade, it would be the best case scenario for everybody involved, because then he eases his way into the league and he has Sexton and Garland there to finish plays, and he has Love and he has Allen. And I think that's part of the calculus. Like, obviously the next question we can't base our future cores off of guys who could play there because the lottery odds are so fucked. But I think that it's very interesting to see. I'd like those two guards individually. I think Sexton to me kind of reminds me of Mitchell a lot. I think that Donovan Mitchell, I think Mitchell's obviously better right now because he's obviously been in the league longer, but I think that those two guys just are very dynamo individual scorers. And I think that the fact that Sexton is shooting 48% from the field on this team is fucking remarkable. Like, he should not be shooting this well. He's only shooting 35% from 3, but how many of those are catch and shoots? I would probably venture to say like 1.5. He's shooting 4.4 a game. So 1.5 catch and shoots. If you're shooting 35% from 3 on mostly pull-ups, I can kind of live with that. I think that he definitely, I would not trust Sexton to be a lead creator, but I think Garland can get there. I like Garland's game. I think he's got a lot of IQ there. I think there's something legitimate there where he can become the guy that leads your offense. Kyrie might be a good way to put it, because he could be, I don't think he's like a pure creator, like let's just say Mike Conley kind of guy, but I think he could be, average 7 assists a game for you, something like that. I think that's there. So I would tend to agree that they can work, but I think they need defensive help on the back line, and adding Jarrett Allen to that equation is a huge help.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see where they go with Larry Nance in the offseason. I think if you plugged Larry Nance into that starting lineup, I think you would have a lot of things solved, because he's just a great off-ball player and he's a very good athletic defender. So I think he would fit really well with what they have. It's just the whole Kevin Love question, which we'll get to. But yeah, getting a wing in the draft would be great. And I don't think it has to be Cade. Again, I don't know much about the guys after the top 3 really, except for our Baylor boys. But I mean, Cade would obviously be great, but I know there are some small forwards down on the list a little bit. So definitely don't get a guard. I mean, I'm definitely not, draft for fit, but you can't draft Suggs when you got these guys unless you want to trade one of them. So yeah, if they can get a small forward or, whatever to plug into the middle of that lineup, I think they'd be set.
Yeah. And let's just go ahead and move on to the next question, because I feel like that's a good segue into the next question. So you have Sexton, you have Garland, you have Isaac Okoro, and you have Jared Allen. Those four guys are four very solid young players. I think you could make an argument that's one of the best young cores in the league, just because how well Jared Allen's been playing. Listen, this podcast might be the Jared Allen fan club between the two of us. But so, okay, I asked you to rank these young cores as presently constituted. Presently, because again, we can't like say, oh, if this team adds Cade, they'll be the top, right? Like we can't do that because we're in 2021 land. We're not in 2022 yet. So rank these cores, and I'm sure you already did, but Cleveland, Detroit, Oklahoma City, Minnesota, and Orlando.
So I'm assuming Cat is not included in young core. I'm still going to go with Minnesota number one.
Interesting.
Just because of Anthony Edwards. I think out of all the players on these teams, Anthony Edwards has the best potential to be a superstar. And we can get cute and talk about all these guys that could be stars or very good players. I don't care about that. I'm going for superstar potential. And everything I've seen out of Anthony Edwards, including him not knowing who Alex Rodriguez is.
That's great.
I mean, how could you not want to root for that guy for 20 years, you know? But I mean, I think solely having him, I seriously think he has a great chance of being a superstar or at least an all-star. And I like a lot of the other guys they have on the team too. I mean, I like McDaniels a lot. I've talked about Okogie. Jarrett Culver.
You won't quit. You won't quit Okogie. You won't quit Okogie.
I won't. Listen, man, he's going to be Marcus Smart. Okay, you just got to give him time. And also Lou Dort is also going to be Marcus Smart. So there's going to be a litter of Marcus Smarts in the league. We got a bright future for us here. But Jarrett Culver. I'm giving him like a year or two left, but I'm definitely worried about him at the moment. But I still think he's got some upside. And then, Naz Reid, like there's a lot of nice little pieces on this team. So that's my number one.
And then what give the rest of your list? Let's do the rest of your list too while we're at it.
So I went with Orlando too.
Interesting.
Because listen, it's easy to hate on right now, but they got John Isaac and Markelle Fultz.
I didn't even think to include them. That totally changes the rankings.
Yeah, those are two very good starters. And I don't know if Fultz can be an all-star, but I think Isaac probably could once his offense comes along. I mean, before he got hurt, he was really starting to put things together. And I mean, he's going to be like all defense for his whole career. So it just comes down to, is he going to be able to create his own shot, which I think he can. He was really starting to show that. And then even outside of that, Wendell Carter Jr., I still got some faith in. Chuma Okeke, our boy. So, and I'm not going to throw Cole Anthony into that group, but I guess he technically has a chance of being a decent NBA player.
And then
I went Cleveland number 3 because I like Sexton and Garland, and they've got some nice other pieces, but it's just when you compare the best two on Orlando to the best two on Cleveland, I'm going to take Orlando and Detroit. And Detroit's last on this list, but I like Detroit's future. Like, I think they did a really good job in the draft this year. So I like what they have. I mean, Killian Hayes is back, so I'm kind of excited to watch. I think we have them next week, don't we?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, we do.
Yeah. So I'm excited to keep watching these young guys and of course our boy Sadiq Bey just knocking down threes like no one's business. So yeah, despite putting them last, I still like what they have.
So, okay. So you have Minnesota 1, Orlando 2, Cleveland 3, OKC 4, and then.
Oh, I forgot about OKC. Yeah. OKC is after Cleveland. Wait, shoot. See, that messed it up because I completely blanked on OKC. I'll put OKC before Cleveland because I think Shea, Dort, and then all the random other guys they have. And by the way, I was looking at box scores this morning, and I so badly wanted to tweet at Sam Presti. I don't even know if he has a Twitter, but I so badly wanted to tweet, hey, Sam Presti, Moses Brown's been playing pretty well lately. You might as well just cut him because, good players clearly don't belong on this team anymore. But I refrain from that.
Listen, I'm proud of your growth, Dylan. I really am. It means a lot to watch you grow and not want to tweet at Sam Presti. It warms my heart, really. But so okay, so I'll go list mine. So I'm moving Orlando to 1 just because I think Fultz and Isaac, those two potential, like even with Fultz not having a jump shot, like I think that the potential is sky high. And then you add Chuma and you add Wendell's looking a lot better in Orlando. And I'm going to try to watch a lot of Orlando to compensate for us not talking about them and bring them up on the pod as much as possible. But yeah, Wendell's looking really good in Orlando. So you have that foursome right there. Then I had OKC too, just strictly because I love Shea. And you know the real reason I had OKC. They were 1. You know the real reason I had OKC 1 because Poku. I'm more and more convinced every time I watch this guy. He is going to figure it out. He is going to be a superstar, and no one is going to know how to stop this guy. And I'm just convinced. I had Cleveland 3 because I think that Sexton and Allen is just a hell of a foundation. And then you add Garland and Okoro. I think that the surrounding pieces aren't there. Right. Like I think the Minnesota has more pieces that are useful, but I think the pieces that are in Cleveland are are going to be good within the next couple of seasons. And they're going to be very good. Like Jared Allen's good now and Colin Sexton is good now. And Darius Garland is very close to being good now. And Okoro, if Okoro figures it out on offense, he's going to be making $25 million a year. I love Isaac Okoro. This is a very pro Okoro podcast too. I remember we raved about him last time, but then I have Minnesota 4th. I think Edwards is a bright spot, and I like McDaniels, but I don't like McDaniels as much as I like, Garland I don't like McDaniels as much as I like Lou Dort. So I think that there's a very clear differentiating line, and Minnesota's going to add talent. And then Detroit was last. I love Sadiq Bey. I love Isaiah Stewart. I love the way that guy plays basketball. And apparently he's shooting threes now, which is going to be an interesting thing to watch for when we watch Detroit next week. But I mean, Killian Hayes, I need to see more. We haven't seen him at all. I know I haven't willingly seeked out any Detroit games other than the week we watched them. But I mean, like they're doing a lot of good second draft stuff too. Like I want to see what they do with Dennis Smith Jr. Right. If they can turn Dennis Smith Jr.'s career around, then I'll be more invested in the Pistons. Like I like how they're approaching their team building. I think that's a fascinating aspect. I think this is a real fascinating discussion here on like what we value. I think it was a good little discussion. Anything else on young cores, Dylan Hughes, before we move on to our last Cavs question?
I imagine that this summer is going to be heavy young core discussion, especially after the draft. So I think we can save it for then.
Oh yeah. And especially after Sam Presti, after the Timberwolves win the lottery and Sam Presti trades the Houston pick and and their own pick to Minnesota and just evenly distributes the young talent. Sam Presti holds all the means of acquiring young talent at this point. I think as a monopoly, frankly, it's disgusting.
You know what's funny is like they have so much draft capital that it depends what happens on this draft, but it would be interesting to see if Minnesota got desperate if they lost and was just like, oh, this is probably a good time to trade Cat. And they're just like, hey, OKC, I know you probably don't want to be good next year, but shit, you could have Karl Anthony Towns. You're probably not going to ever have anything better in the draft than that. So here you go. It's an interesting thing to watch out for.
It's kind of like that, like, NFL draft, like, first round picks are just like this end all be all. Like NFL draft picks are more valuable than NBA draft picks just because of the way salary structures work and whatnot. But at the same time, like, what first round pick is ever going to get you Matthew Stafford? You know what I mean? Like, what first round pick? Like, you're basing it all on potential and what a guy can be. And if you're going all in, what's the harm in throwing away one first round? Like, really, the Rams only traded one first round pick for Stafford. They traded the other one to get off of Jared Goff, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing about the draft. You're betting on potential and what a guy can be, and oftentimes not what a guy is. So I think that's an interesting way to view it, Dylan, because OKC can't get a guy as good as Cat. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I think Cat is a prime get traded in the offseason guy. I think he's done in Minnesota. I think we both think that. But let's go ahead and move on to our last big picture question. And Kevin Love, one of the last remaining vestiges of the 2016 team. Delly came back, so I don't know if that counts the same way, but he's playing and he's bombing threes, and it looks like he's playing well from the games I've seen him in. But right now, 11 points, 6 rebounds, and 37.5% from three on 6 attempts in the game, which this team sorely need shooting of any sort. But if you were Kobe Altman, right, and let's just say you were Kobe Altman, not Kevin Pritchard, and not going back in time to cut Jeremy Lamb, what do you do with Kevin Love? Do you keep him? Like, do you say, hey, this guy's going to be really good for young guys to play with and develop with? Or do you say, hey, this guy just isn't worth it to us? What do you do with Kevin Love long term?
Well, a past version of myself would say, fuck him and just get rid of him, which, of course, in this economy, with 2 years on his deal still, would basically be impossible unless you're willing to just eat a significant amount of change. But I'm at a point now where it's like Kevin Love doesn't get in the way. Like, he's a good passer, good shooter, good rebounder. Like, I don't see, aside from just playing time, I don't see how he could hurt their development. I don't know if he's going to help it significantly, but I don't really see him hindering anything. So I mean, at least give it another year again, just because that contract, you're never going to trade him. So it's either you are going to willingly eat money for him to play for a team that's going to try to win, or you just keep him around and see if he can pass something along and help these guys on the floor. So I am pro keeping Kevin Love.
Yeah, I think Kevin Love has a very complimentary skill set for this team. I think this. So next offseason, they have Jared Allen is going to be a restricted free agent, and he is probably going to get $100 million a year, or not $100 million a year. That would be crazy. He'd get $25 million a year, right? So that would put them over the salary cap line. But I mean, I think that the thing about Kevin Love is he can play with Jared Allen. I think he'd be really good for Garland's development in particular, because Kevin Love, for all his faults, right, and I think a lot of his faults over the years has just been he hasn't been able to stay healthy. He knows where to be on offense. He knows where to be. I mean, the defense has always sucked with him, but you're not trying to win anything right now. I think it's completely fine to keep Kevin Love. Let him, again, complementary skill set. Shoots threes really well. He can offensive rebound if he needs to. Just get down in the paint and just set screens, right? And I think that I like their guys that are just setting screens for them now, like Larry Nance. You could play Nance and Love, and you could play Love and Allen, right? I think that all those combinations work, and I think it's going to be good for this young team. I don't know what they're going to do with Larry Nance. That's the question of the offseason, really, for the Cavs. But I don't see why you don't just keep him. He's making $10 million next year, and he's going to be making 9.7 the next year. So I would just probably try to keep Larry Nance and just try to run this thing out, man. Like, what bad is it? Like, Kevin Love, it seems like Sexton and Garland love him, right? So it just seems like a good idea to just keep that guy around. I don't know what contenders he would help either, like if he was going to get cut by the Cavs. So we know Dan Gilbert is not cheap, but I don't even think he would want to eat $60 million the next 2 years. I just don't see that happening. And I don't see anyone who would want to trade for Kevin Love. I think let him play out the string next year, buy him out the year after that, let him give back like $5 million or something of the 28.9, and just let him, bomb threes on a contender. But I mean, I think that he's good for this roster because he just gives them an element of spacing. Like, what other shooters do they have on this roster? Genuinely speaking, they don't really have any. Taurean Prince right now is bombing threes for them. And I know if I say the Taurean Prince word around you, you go into convulsions, Dylan Hughes. But I mean, they really don't have any shooters at the moment. Like Windler doesn't shoot a whole lot. Like he's inside a lot more than he's outside. I think he fits this team perfectly for the future. Like even if he's not going to be there when Sexton and Garland are stars.
I will address the most important part of that and say that I actually like Taurean Prince now.
Wow.
I don't know what it was. Just, I think Brooklyn, I don't think he's a city guy is what I don't think that's because, Atlanta is a big city and like he was good. He was fine there. I don't think he was great. Like there's a reason they traded him. He gets to Brooklyn and it's kind of like, I think the city kind of pumps his ego a little bit and he thinks he can just shoot and it's fine. And he got traded to Cleveland and he was like, you know what, man? That's not the life for me, man. I'm going to start moving the ball. I'm going to start breaking out on transition all the time. Like I've watched the Cavs since he got there. I don't know, maybe 6 games. And like every game I've watched, I've actually been happy with him. So I have turned the tide on Taurean Prince, but it's because, he's just figured it out and I'm happy for him.
So I pulled up the leaders for the team in 3-point field goal attempts per game. So Kevin Love is at 5.8. Shetty Osman, who was playing quite well the first time we did the Cavs, and I can't really say the same this time, is shooting 5.3 at 30% even. And then Garland's at 4.7. He's shooting 40% from 3. Yogi Ferrell, that shouldn't even count. He's only played 2 games for them. Colin Sexton's at 4.4. Taurean Prince is at 4.1. So, I mean, this team is in dire need of shooting. But, I mean, you can find shooting in, like, the second round of the draft. I think that I really like the future for the Cavs. I think that they have a really solid foundation. And this is probably the best they've looked post-LeBron in, like, the last... Hell, I like this team a lot better as currently constructed than the Deion Waiters, Kyrie, Tristan Thompson team. Like I like this team a lot better than the Cavs before LeBron showed up the second time. So anything else to add about the Cavs before we move on to your Indiana Pacers, Dylan Hughes?
I'm set.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to your Indiana Pacers. So they are 26-28, good for 9th in the Eastern Conference. And the last week they played the Orlando Magic and beat them 111-106. Then on Sunday, they beat the Memphis Grizzlies 132-125 and one of probably the most entertaining games we've had in a while. Then on Tuesday, they lost to Dylan Hughes' Los Angeles Clippers. He resents that I probably said that, but the look on his face says it all, folks. You can't see at home because this is a audio medium, but they lost to the Los Angeles Clippers 126-115. And then they beat the Houston Rockets 132-124. So I feel like we got to talk about Caris LeVert before we get into the big picture questions, because obviously that's the big thing that's changed since last time we watched the Pacers, because Caris was still recovering from his renal carcinoma surgery. So Dylan Hughes, just real quick, what have you liked from Caris LeVert so far in an Indiana Pacers uniform?
Well, we picked a great week to have the Pacers because he's been awesome this week. I mean, when he first came back, he was struggling a bit. He missed a good amount of time. I think he was just getting his legs back. And of course, he's on a new team. He's going to have to try to fit in. But man, he's been good. Like this is the guy that you wanted, the guy that just gets into the paint. And it's funny because he's really skinny. Like he doesn't seem like a guy that would just easily be able to get in the paint and like maneuver the way he does. I mean, he'll get a defender on his hip and just start rotating all kinds of directions to get a shot up. And, he's interesting to watch because he never really goes all the way to the rim. He kind of just stops a little bit short. And I mean, he's found a lot of success there. So I'm not saying that as a negative, but he's figured it out that that's a good spot for him. But he's just fun to watch. I mean, he's just ruthless with the ball when like he knows exactly what he wants to do with it. And lately he's been having great success of getting shots to fall. And it seems like he's meshed with this group pretty quickly. So it's been fun to watch.
Yeah. He's only played 18 games in Indiana, which, I mean, the season just is going by at like a meteoric. I can't say that word right now. Meteoric rate. I think that's how you say it.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, so the season is moving at a meteoric rate, and it feels like he's been back for like a couple months, but he's only been back for a month. He came back on March 13th, And I mean, he's already averaging 18 points a game for the Pacers. Like, he's come out and he's basically been doing what he did in Brooklyn when they were staggering his minutes with KD and Kyrie. And you got to really give him a lot of props. Like, the toughness thing, I don't like going all in on that because, you know, it's kind of just a trope when you're talking about sports. But like, man, the toughness he had to come back from this, in like, not even injury, from this, you know, he had cancer, full blown cancer. So, and the fact that he's already playing so well and looking so smooth, that totally slipped my mind before this, like just this moment. But the fact that he's looking so smooth out there and just making the good reads, he's bringing an element of penetration to the Pacers that they really haven't had. I mean, Dylan, I don't know. You would probably say Victor Oladipo in 2018. Like, they need like someone who can knife into the lane the way that Karras does. And I feel like they haven't had that till now.
Yeah. I mean, Brogdon attacks, but it's very different. Like, it takes some time to develop. And I mean, we saw in the playoffs last year with Bam just swallowing up every drive he had. And I don't think LeVert would let him get away with that. Like, he's just so fast and like smooth that he gets to his spots very quickly. And yeah, like, he likes to kind of bang around down there to get a better shot. But by the time he's down there, it's kind of chaos defensively. So that definitely has been a huge impact. And you can see it, like, there's so many good off-ball players on this team that penetration opens up a ton of shooting. And that's why they've been playing a lot better lately, I think.
Yeah, if I could pull it up, I would pull up like 3-point shooting stats for like McDermott and Holiday, since both Holidays played very well this week. But I would be interested to see the numbers since he started playing more and just like how he's opened up the offense for them. But it's a real interesting mix of guys, right? Like, so we didn't have Miles Turner this week. I don't think we saw him in any games this week. He's out with an ankle injury. He's listed as day-to-day right now. So he should be back hopefully soon. If he's listed as day-to-day, that means he should be out soon. And then obviously TJ Warren, if you've been paying any attention to the Pacers, he has only played 4 games this year, and he is not going to play again until next year. Hope speedy recovery is out for TJ Warren, because I really want to see this team at full strength. But I mean, Dylan, between Brogdon, Sabonis, and LeVert, there's a lot of firepower on this team. Before we move on to our first big picture question, I feel like this team, like in the future, could make a lot of noise between those guys, between those three.
Yeah, I mean, this season has obviously been tough, and the Warren injury has just killed him. I'm looking at the standings right now, and I'm just thinking they're 3.5 games back of the 4 seed. If you have Warren this whole time, I think they probably are if they're not there, they're close to it. I mean, he was that good last year. I have a lot of confidence that, I mean, I think he was actually probably their best player last year. And Sabonis gets all the praise, but man, you watch every game. Like, everyone wants to talk about the scoring, but he was huge in their defense, because he was a really good man-to-man defender, but he was also really smart about when to jump passing lanes. Like, he seemed to do it perfectly every time, and not having him in there has I think it's impacted them more than a lot of outsiders kind of recognize. But I mean, again, like LeVert, Sabonis, Brogdon, like what they have right now, I still think that's a great trio. And I mean, it's tough. I mean, just based on how the standings are, they're going to lose in the first round. There's just no way they're not. But if they had a little bit more health on their side, I think they'd be fine. And that's why I'm optimistic about next year.
Yeah. So, and I feel like a lot of the young guys on this roster have been playing really well too. That leads me to my first big picture question for the Pacers is that how have you liked the young guys, how the young guys have played recently between Aaron Holiday, Edmund Sumner. Oh, that's a tough one for me to say. I never actually said it out loud. I always just write it. Edmund Sumner. There you go. And then Goga Batadze. Like, those three to me, like, have looked really good for the Pacers in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I've been high on Sumner for a while, and I know it took you some time to come around, which I get. Like, even now, his offense is still pretty raw, and I worry that his 3-point shot is just never going to hit, because, I mean, he hits them sometimes, but he gets open looks constantly, And it seems like they just end up long all the time. Like, I think his mechanics need some work. He kind of does one of those catapult things where it's not a good replicable shot. So it's understandable why it hasn't dropped for him yet. But man, like on the ball, that dude is electric. Like I love watching him and LeVert at the same time because they're both fast as hell. Like I've never seen two guys on the same team move that quickly. I mean, they are like really just fun to watch. And Sumner is by far the quickest. And I would like to see him in a foot race with some of these guys in the league, like John Wall and Russell Westbrook, like these guys that are just have always been really quick. De'Aaron Fox. I mean, I think he could potentially beat them. Like he is very fast. And I mean, you can see it. He flies down the floor and he's a great finisher, like on speed. A lot of these guys, they run a little bit too quick. They end up missing the shot at the hoop, but he'll just kind of stop on a dime and lay it in real nicely. And I really enjoy seeing him start to see some more good stuff happen for him. Cause I think he's got a place in their future for sure, especially with how he's played lately. And Goga still has a long way to go, but much better than last year. His defensive positioning is better, but he still doesn't block shots really. Like a lot of these ball handlers aren't scared to go at him, and that's not a good sign, but he's definitely altering shots. He's just not blocking shots. So he's still got to work on his timing and positioning a bit, but it's much better than last year. I mean, it's much better, and that's a good sign because last year he looked really bad. And offensively, he's looked more comfortable too. So I think by next year he could probably be a pretty reliable backup. So with the 18th pick, I don't think that's that bad of a deal. And then Holiday, I just go back and forth on because he's been up and down. I mean, he has periods where he's like a very good shooter, good finisher and driver, decent little passer, but he's been like that lately, but he just flickers back and forth too much. And I was actually thinking, depending on where the Pacers end up falling, like if they make the playoffs or not, I would be interested to see if the Pacers would be willing to package Holiday in their pick to move up because there's so many good guards in this draft. I wonder if there's a team that would look at Aaron Holiday and say, you know what? I think this guy would be worth trading back like 3 to 4 spots. Just take a little flyer on him and see what we can get later on. Because, I mean, the Pacers have a lot going on at guard right now, and you're going to have someone good not playing. I think Sumner at this point has proven that he's just more consistent than Holiday, and he doesn't offer the shooting, which obviously in the NBA comes at a premium, but pretty much everything else he does better than Holiday. And obviously McConnell, I mean, just sign that dude to a max deal right now. Like there's no way he's leaving, and he's obviously going to get a ton of playing time. He's just, there was a play the other night against, I don't know if it was the Clippers game. Yeah. Where he hits a 3 at the end of the first quarter, the very first play of the second quarter, he gets a layup, steals the inbound pass, gets a layup. So just 7 points within like 30 seconds from TJ McConnell. I mean, just an absolute superstar that doesn't get enough attention. I don't know how. I'm just fascinated to see how the Hall of Fame goes at the end of his career, Hall of Fame voting. He's not going to get as much voting as he should, but I know it in my heart, he's a Hall of Famer, and that's really all that matters. But I mean, I'm interested to see what they do with Holiday because he's had interest around the league for a while, and I'd be interested to see if they can cash in on that and maybe move up in the draft.
Or get like I don't know, maybe like a Larry Nance and throw it in with Jeremy Lamb or something. Because you're right, this team is going to have way too many guys to play. Like they are just very deep. They need a Larry Nance. They've always needed the Larry Nance kind of guy, but especially now, where Larry Nance would be the heaviest player on their team. Like I know that the media guide probably says that Sabonis and Turner both weigh more than Larry Nance, but just look at Larry Nance, then look at Sabonis and look at Turner, and they don't weigh nearly the same. But I think Aaron Holiday is just due for a new team. He's definitely a second draft kind of guy to me. Like he just doesn't like. Maybe OKC takes a flyer on him, right? They send you like one of the like. Let's just say Houston keeps their pick, and they give you Miami's pick, right, or something like that, like that, which will be like 17 or something like that. I don't know. Let me check where they are currently at the lottery. So okay, no, Miami's currently 16. So yeah, you get two young like wing players. And I think it works out, but it's just going to be interesting to see for me what they do this offseason, because there's a lot of different doors, right? Like you have 5 very solid young players. I know LeVert's older, but LeVert's only been in the league for 5 years. He's not like a veteran, a well-established veteran by any means. So like they have a very solid core between Turner, between Sabonis, between Brogdon, LeVert, TJ Warren. And then you go to the bench. McConnell's a free agent this year, but I can't imagine, like, even with how well he's playing, he's not going to get starter money. You know what I mean? Like he'll probably make like 10 million a year or something, like at the absolute most. And you could bring him back. McDermott's going to be the one. McDermott's not coming back to Indiana, I don't think. McDermott's a unrestricted free agent next year. And there's going to be some team like the Celtics will scoop him up or something like that. Somebody will scoop him up, like some contender. The Lakers will scoop him up and he'll be a NBA champion. I'm calling it right now. But I guess that leads me to my next question, Dylan, is that do you think that Kevin Pritchard can turn this team into a title contender? It feels like they're honestly not that far removed, but it feels like there's some pieces like, that maybe need to be added or tweaked a little bit. Like, what do you think? Do you trust Pritchard to get the team to a place where they can contend for a title?
I don't know if it's a lack of trust. It's just the way the league works is you got to have one of the best 10 guys and then probably one of the best 25 right next to him. And there's only so much you can do about that. Like you either got to trade for one and give up everything else that matters to you, or you got to draft one. And unless they miss the playoffs and get lucky in the lottery, that's not going to happen. So next year you're looking at having, a top 4 of Brogdon, Sabonis, LeVert, and Warren. And I mean, their starting 5 is going to be awesome. Like throwing Turner into that mix too. I mean, it's a great regular season team, but when you get to the playoffs and you face James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant, it's I don't want to say it's impossible, but it pretty much is. And hey, if you beat them, you can play Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday. And hey, if you beat them, here's Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. It's like, you got to have one of those guys or 2 of those guys. And they just don't. They have a bunch of really good players. They have 4 guys that could be all-stars and, a guy that could be the defensive player of the year. But they just, I think they're a really good playoff team, and they're going to lose probably in the second round. And that's just how it goes. And I mean, you could trade 2 of those guys and maybe get one of those top guys, but I don't know who it would be. And I mean, they definitely have like enough players where they could package a few together and try to pull in a big name, but would they take that risk? I don't know. Like Pritchard's not scared to take risk, and the big deals he's made, he's done well in. The Paul George deal worked out great, and the Oladipo deal I think is going to work out great too. But as far as that next level, can he pull it off? And I'm not sure about that.
That's the question of the day, really. It's just like, first of all, are the Simons willing to go into the luxury tax? And that's a question that's always been a definitive no. So there's that right there. And then it's just like, you're right. This team is full of guys that could be all-stars, but they just aren't, right? Like, and there's something missing for like, if Brogdon was a little bit quicker, he'd be a top 20 player. If Sabonis could play defense, he'd be a top 20 player, but they can't do that. And so you got to adjust your expectations accordingly, right? Like Sabonis is still young, and I wouldn't be surprised if he somehow learned to become an elite defensive player, right? Like that, just based on the way Sabonis's career has gone, it wouldn't surprise me at all. But also wouldn't surprise me if if this is what he was for the next 10 years of his career. And that's a good career for Domantas Sabonis, but it's tough because you think like, can this team climb the mountaintop. And you're right. The East is only getting stronger, right? And I think this is something we're noticing. Like the East isn't going to be what it was the past 10 years, right? Like it's not going to be what it was during LeBron James's era, where Tim Duncan and Kevin Durant and all the top, like Kobe and all the top players are in the Western Conference, and then LeBron's over here camped out in the East, and then the next player is like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan and Paul Millsap and Al Horford, right? Like that's not the way it's going to be anymore. Look at the top of the East. Like you have Giannis, Embiid, Simmons, Butler, KD, Kyrie, Harden, right? Like those 7 guys are 7 of the top like 15, 20 best players in the league. That's not the way it used to be in the East. And then Toronto's surely going to bounce back next year. And you don't know the way it's going to go. And I wish this Pacers team could win a championship. Like if you put one of those top 20 guys on the Pacers, I think they could win a championship. I think this is a championship core, but there's no championship player, if that makes sense. Like championship top dog.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. And it kind of reminds me of the Raptors team last year without Kawhi. It's like, hey, if you put Kawhi on this team, they'd probably win the championship. And I kind of look at the Pacers the exact same way. It's like, if you just were to replace one of these guys with, a top 10 player, it's like a no doubt finals team. But you gotta, that's the last and most important piece is that one guy. And those are the toughest guys to get. So it's Pritchard's doing his best, but the odds are stacked against him.
And like, I don't blame the Pacers for going for it, right? Like I don't blame them for trying to be competitive, but like your team is young enough where you could have probably just like, hey, DeMontis, you could take a little break for tonight. Hey, Malcolm, you could take a little bit. Like this team, the timeline isn't that far off for them to add like a young star prospect if they were willing to, go that route. But the Pacers famously haven't had a top 10 pick since, or like haven't picked higher than 10 since the 1980s. And I don't think that the Simon are going to be willing to break that streak because they're not doing so well in 2021. So I think that I'm not going to say they're going to be mired in mediocrity because I think they'll be better than mediocre the next couple of years. But I mean, it's going to feel like a treadmill of mediocrity when they're not winning anything. And the best they're making it to, like a second round appearance, feels like a championship.
Yeah. And, they do still have a chance to get a decent pick because the way things are right now, and of course, Charlotte is very quickly sinking, but the Pacers, like they have to win 2 games to make the playoffs. So, I mean, right now they would have to beat the Bulls and Charlotte, which obviously is very doable, but by that time, Hayward could be back for Charlotte. And
LaMelo.
Yeah, I still would be surprised, but it's definitely possible. And I mean, the Bulls, I wouldn't put it past the Bulls to be really good a month from now because I mean, they suck right now, but like they just got Vucevic, right? Like you usually don't just drop an all-star center into a team and they're awesome. Like it takes time. And I mean, a month from now, and I know Levine's going to miss half of that time, but they could be in a better spot and the Pacers are going to have to, unless Charlotte drops more and the Pacers just have to win 1 game, they're going to have to beat 2 decent teams. So they could get lucky with the lottery still. And even if they don't get lucky, this lottery is stacked. So they could get an awesome player at, the end of the lottery. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think that's just the way it's going to have to go. Let's go ahead and move on to the last big picture question. And this is just the question I had because I thought it was going to be a fun little exercise. So rank these mid-tier centers. So I think we both agree Sabonis is very good, but not the best. That's okay. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of these guys. So 3 of these guys play in the East, 2 of them play in the West. So rank these mid-tier centers, Dylan Hughes: Nikola Vucevic, Domantas Sabonis, Clint Capella, Jonas Valanciunas, and then Yusuf Nurkic.
So first of all, you're doing a great job because these guys are very close. Like you could swap them around and I don't think it'd be that crazy, but I went with Vooch first. I mean, just, great offensive player. And like we saw what the Bulls just gave up for him to get him. Like that's a very valuable type of guy, even though not a great defender, but honestly, like everyone has their flaws on this list. So, it is what it is. And then Sabonis 2, just because of the impact he has offensively. Like he's nowhere near Jokic, but like he has kind of a similar responsibility where he does a lot of the ball handling. He does a lot of screening, and he's also like a good post guy, and very slowly developing a 3-point shot. It may take 5 more years, but eventually he'll knock them down consistently. And obviously one of the best passing big men in the league. And I mean, we saw last year in the playoffs what the Pacers were without him. Like I think if they had him, they would have at least won 1 game. So that was kind of proving that he was a huge deal for them. And then I went with Jonas at 3. Just a guy I love, man. And he's on our Memphis Grizzlies, of course. Just killing it on both ends of the floor. Like just consistently being one of the most underrated players in the league. He doesn't care. He doesn't need the attention. He's going to go curl up in his man cave in Memphis and be happy and drop 18 and 10 every night. Like he's fine with that. And I respect that. This one was tough. And as much as I love Nurkic, and I did end up going Nurkic just because of the passing, but I've kind of started to lose. I think he's lost his luster a little bit. And granted, I think injuries have played a large part in that, but I still went with him just because, again, he can pass. And like, I love Capella, man. I debated putting him way higher on the list just because he's the situation that the situation he's been in both teams, he's been exactly what those teams have needed because, hey, they happen to have one of the best passers in the league. Like he's always had one of the best passers on the league on his team. So he's been a great fit for Harden and Trae Young. But, you know, just because of Nurkic's passing, I went with him. But Capella, man, and I'm even debating, like, if I'm in the playoffs, would I rather have Capella or Gobert? We just keep seeing Gobert crumble. And we're going to talk about the Jazz, but we've seen it more this year where Snyder has pulled him because, hey, when you have Derek Favors on the bench, you know, you don't have to put up with Gobert being fucked over by some mismatch that they keep exploiting. And I'm fascinated to see in the playoffs what happens with that because we see it all the time. And granted, like the Rockets were a big part of that, and they played them twice in a row. So I think part of the narrative was spoiled by that. But I mean, he couldn't hold his own against Jokic last year. So it's like, if you can't defend the only guy in the West you need to defend, really, besides AD, then what the hell is the point of you? So, and I'm not saying Capella could do it, but I'm not saying he can't either. So it's just a little question I have that I'm going to be thinking about moving forward.
This is very interesting. We have completely different lists because I have Clint Capella at number 1. I think that the defense that he's brought, I think that, yes, Nikola Vucevic did deserve the all-star spot. That being said, for the whole of this season, I think Capella's been better. And it's crazy. But I think Capella's flying under the radar. I mean, even for us, right? Like, I think that he's just been so good on both sides, right? Like 15, 14, 2 blocks. Exactly what you need. Gives you exactly what you need. He rolls to the rim hard every single time. Doesn't complain. Isn't like, you know, give me a post touch, right? Like he's not demanding post touches. He's trying to help the Hawks win. And I think he's been one of their, I think we agreed even when the Hawks were struggling, when we had them the first time, he was one of their 3 best players. But I would still say it's probably him, then Trae Young, and then Bogey. Like I would say that's the pecking order for the Hawks. Like he's been that important for them. I think he's been one of the 5 best centers in the league this year. I think if I was going to rank it, I'm not going to rank Cat just out of respect for the crazy 12 months he's had. But like in whatever order, Jokic, Embiid, Gobert, Capella, and then maybe even Vooch. So maybe I have Capella as a top 4 center. I think Capella's been better than Vooch this year, as crazy as it is to say. I think just like what he's done for the Hawks, you can't quantify it with numbers, you know, like just been consistent on both sides. And I think that he's been the best of these 5 so far. And then obviously I have Vooch too. Very good offensive center, but a lot to be desired on the defensive end, which, you know, I love the Vooch trade on offense for the Bulls, but I think their lack of a point guard is really showing right now. I think that's kind of what's doing them in more than anything. Like, because if they had a point guard, and I know we love Kobe, but he's kind of more of a gunner at this point than a point guard, as much as I hate to say it. But I think if they had a point guard, they'd be fine, and they don't have a point guard right now. So that's why he's 2, the defense. And Sabonis, I think the Jokic light is kind of a good comparison for him. Like, he does a lot of the Jokic stuff, but like, I feel like he never has the biggest impact on the Pacers, as crazy as it is. Like, I feel like he's very important to the Pacers. I'm not saying he's not, but like, it just does, like, it feels like he can maybe have like a little bit of a bad shooting game and the Pacers can still put up enough points, right? And then he doesn't make up the passing. It's tough. This is where it's tough, right? This is where I stump myself. I told you when I prepared these big picture questions, I stumped myself making this list because the passing, he's probably the best passer out of these 5. Like, if I was going to rank the passing, it'd be Sabonis 1, Nurkic 2, Vooch 3, Capella 4, and then Jonas 5 probably. But I think that it's tough. If he had a jumper, he'd be probably number 1 or 2 for me. I just think that's kind of what separates it, because he can do almost everything on the offensive end, but not everything yet. And I think if he had a jumper, I would trust him more. But I think that, I think you can kind of take Sabonis a game more than you can kind of take Capella and Vooch out, if that makes sense. So give me him at 3. Jonas at 4. I think he's been an absolute fucking wrecking ball. Like, we saw him 32 and 25 on Sabonis on Sunday. Like, I don't think there's anyone in the league as strong as Valanciunas at this point, including him and Zion. That's the list. So Jonas is 4 for me. He's just absolute fucking wrecking ball, doing what he needs to do. And then I have Nurkic 5. And this is no disrespect to Nurkic, but like, I feel like even healthy, I just feel like the peak might be a little lower. Like, okay, the peak is higher for Nurkic than Valanciunas, but right now Valanciunas is just playing at a much better level than Nurkic. And it's not Nurkic's fault because he's coming back from injury, but Nurkic needs to be like, Nurkic is basically Joakim Noah of this recent era, and I want to see that from him. But I think he's very good, and I want to see him come back to full health, because I think that could really improve Portland's chances, because Portland is kind of not doing well. Portland could have moved up to 5. But they've kind of been stagnant while Los Angeles has been falling. So the Lakers. So I think this is a good discussion, Dylan. I liked how we were different on our lists.
So you said we had completely different lists, but we really had the same list, except Capella jumped all the way to the front of the line. Everyone else was the correct order. But I mean, and that's I understand like why. Again, I just talked up Capella. Like, I think he's. Again, I mean, I just argued for him over Gobert. Like, I think as far as complimentary guys, he's at least top 3 in the league for like the role he plays. And this year, I think you're right that he's at least 1 or 2. And I just from like a standalone, I'm always going to pick the creators. Like, that's just my style. And if we did this with point guards, I would go that same way. Like, if you don't have a pull-up jump shot, there's always certain things in positions I'm going to value differently. But if the question was, hey, we have Trae Young, who do you want next to him? or just to make it like a neutral, if we have John Morant, I guess it's not neutral.
Here's one. Monte Morris. You have Monte Morris. Who are you picking
there you
first?
Go. Yeah. If you have a good creator on a team already, who's the center on this list? I'm definitely taking Capella. So I 100% understand why you went with him number 1.
Like, this is the thing about centers to me. And if you're not a complimentary type of player, like Rashawn Holmes, right? I'll just use him as an example because he's on the brain, because he said he should be on an all defensive team. He's a very good defensive player. I think both of us would not deny that. However, he has not made their defense appreciably better this year, because they are the worst defense in the history of the NBA by almost a mile at this point. Listen, you need to be a good complimentary player, and I'll use Rashawn Holmes as the example, right? Like, he's like probably bordering on the outside of this list, but he's really good. And I think the reason he's really good is because he's a complimentary player, right? And most centers have to be complimentary players. But the difference between like Sabonis and Vooch, and when he's healthy, Nurkic, is that those guys' complementary skill sets, they also have creating skill sets involved too. Like Vooch can create for himself more than Capella can. But at the end of the day, like, are the limitations of what Vooch brings to the table, are they hurting you more than his creation is helping you? And they were able to muster a defense around Vucevic in Orlando, but they also had Jonathan Isaac the last couple of years. And he doesn't have Jonathan Isaac this year, and their defense is absolute tire fire. So I love Vooch's offense, but I think that's a worthy discussion to have. Like, would you rather have the guy who can create more offense for you, but takes a lot? It's really a push and pull kind of thing. Like, would you want the guy who takes away a lot, but also gives you a lot? Or do you want the guy that doesn't maybe give you as much, but doesn't take away nearly as much either? It's one of those kind of like push pull, like, you know, on the table, off the table kind of situations. And I think center is in a fascinating place because Vooch absolutely deserves every dime that he's making. But you could argue for a team like so let's just say the Bucks, right? Like, we both agree Brook Lopez isn't the answer at center, but Vooch wouldn't help them at all. I think we could both agree with that. Like, Vooch, maybe he would because he fits next to Giannis in that particular way. But like, what's another team? Like the Warriors. How much would Vooch help the Warriors right now? Like, in them trying to climb up the snide, right? Like, he would help them on offense, but what about the defense? The Warriors defense isn't great right now. So I feel like that's the reason why I had Capella over Vooch personally.
Well, first of all, you made a mistake mentioning the Bucks and centers because you already know who the best center for them is.
Well, we're listen, bud. we know.
I couldn't help myself.
I know. I knew as soon as I brought up Milwaukee, it was a mistake. But you get the general gist of where I'm going with this. Like, it's not like, I think that the complementary skill sets for most contenders help a lot more. And plus, I think Capella's just been balling his ass off this year too. And he wasn't going to get recognized because he didn't play enough games in the first half. But I think that he is, if he stays healthy next year, he's probably going to be an all-star. And he's going to be deserving of it. So it's an interesting discussion. Anything else to add, Dylan, before we move on to the Jazz?
No, man. I think we drove the mid-tier center argument right into the ground.
I thought it was interesting because you're right. Those were guys that are all near each other in the center rankings, like from 5 to 10. So,
well, you know what's funny? I was thinking earlier about this, how there's just such a massive drop off in center because it's like you have Embiid, Jokic, and AD, because I'm considering AD a center because fuck him. I don't care if he's playing point or power forward or not. He's a center. So you have those three guys who are obviously championship level centers that they could absolutely be the best player on your team. And then after that, it's just a massive drop off. And yes, that is more Rudy Gobert shade. But, Rudy Gobert, Clint Capella, if those guys are even the second best player on your team, you're probably not making even the conference finals. So it's just kind of funny, how big of a drop off there is. And that's not a new thing, I'll say. I think it's kind of always been like that, where you're either an awesome fucking center, MVP candidate, or you're probably the third best player on your team. It kind of seems like it's always been like that.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the Joakim Noah years where he was probably a top 10, not top 10, probably a top 15 guy in the league just because of everything he brought to the table and didn't take off. The only thing he couldn't do was shoot, and people didn't want center shooting like that back then. So I think that's a good example. And then when Joakim Noah started to fall off a cliff because of his injuries, he then was the fifth best player on the Knicks. And it was a huge problem because he was making 18 million a year. So it goes to show how quickly things can change when you're a center and you're so big and your knees just get hurt all the time. But let's go ahead and move on to the guy you just mentioned, Rudy Gobert. Let's go ahead and move on to his team, the Utah Jazz. So the Jazz are still on fucking fire. They have been on fire all year. 41-14, good for first in the Western Conference and first in the whole league. Not that matters that much. This week, they had I felt like they had a pretty good week this week. So they beat the Trailblazers 122-103. They then beat the Sacramento Kings 128-112. A baffling loss to the Washington Wizards, who just Westbrook seems to show up once every 4 games and defeat a contender. They lost to the Wizards 125-121. And then they beat the Thunder on Tuesday 106-96 in spite of Lou Dort's 42 points. Doherty 2 points?
Oh no.
Listen, I had to try it. So it feels like this is probably going to be kind of a repeat discussion of how we've talked about the Jazz really this whole time we've been doing this podcast, which is pretty much almost a year now. Like I think in a couple months it'll be a year like that we've been doing this podcast consistently together. But I mean, is this the Jazz? Just go straight to the big picture question, because not much has changed unless you want to count Ersan Ilyasova, which I don't. Is this the Jazz's really only chance to win a title in the foreseeable future? Like, it feels like this is the time the door is open for them. And do you agree with that?
Oh yeah. And their window may only be open for like 2 more weeks even, because again, if the Lakers get healthy, it's over. Like the reason that they have a shot is because the best 2 teams in the conference are losing guys right now, like Jamal Murray not coming back. So there's nothing Denver can do to fix that. But the Lakers, that's the thing. It's like, if, again, as we mentioned earlier, if just one of those 2 guys is out, it's a significant issue. And I think they're better off if AD's out than LeBron, obviously. I think LeBron, Schroeder, and Drummond are probably enough. I mean, LeBron carries like fringe all-star type of guys to the finals every year. So I'm not gonna doubt him. But if he's kind of limping, if he's kind of limping into the postseason, this is the Jazz's chance, because I mean, hell, like every other Western team I have issues with. Like, I think Phoenix is probably just experience, but I guess top end talent would be another thing, because Booker has been awesome and I trust that he'll be good in the playoffs, but we don't know. We haven't seen it. And I mean, look at the past few years with Mitchell and Murray. They sucked in the playoffs. So I don't know, Booker, like I don't think Booker would, but there's also plenty of proof working against him that the first time guys play in the playoffs, they suck. So that'll be another interesting thing to look if the Grizzlies make it with Morant. But the Clippers, I mean, I don't even need to go into that. Like, I've made clear why I don't like them, and they've had injury problems too. And so
you don't like the Clippers? That's shocking. Shocking.
I mean, well, you know what, really, it hinges on Paul George. Like, if Paul George is playing at the level he is now, then it's a different story. I just don't trust it. And I know he was injured last year, but it seems like he just kind of randomly gets injured at the worst time. At least that's how it's been the past few years. And you know what? I'm gonna give you something you're gonna like. I'm gonna give you a little bit of Reggie Jackson rant here. Okay, listen. Look at his box score. This dude is a disaster. And I say disaster because he is great every third game. I was watching the highlights of the Pistons game the other night they played, and I got mad at first because I'm like, oh, Reggie Jackson had a good game against the Pistons. And I was mad because it's like, oh, is Reggie Jackson doing this as like a revenge thing because he was on the Pistons and sucked? And I was like, I wanted to get mad at him because I was like, oh, did Reggie Jackson just decide to be good against the Pistons because they cut him or whatever? I was kind of hoping that worked out. But then I looked at the game log, because I know he sucked against the Pacers. So I'm like, let me look at this. And it's like he has 25 plus points every third or fourth game. So you never know when the hell he's going to be awesome. He will be eventually, but you never know. He could also have 8 points that game and have like 5 turnovers. So, and then and he's going to be your backup once Beverly comes back. And Beverly has issues too. Like, I don't love Beverly on offense, at least. So the Clippers, I just have issues with. I've been very vocal about that this year and last year. Portland is just an injury. An injury is going to happen. I don't even need to, they have a great team, but they're going to get injured. It just happens every year. And I would like to think they're not this year because they kind of already have, but they're going to. So I'm sorry to put that out there, but they're going to. So and I don't want to go down the whole freaking conference, but every team has an issue right now, and it may not be like that in a month, but the Jazz were like the one team and they've had some injuries, but they've relatively been fine. And they've basically been a buzzsaw to this point. So, I mean, the window is very slightly cracked open, but they definitely have a shot of squeezing through it.
Yeah, I think that they just have the most solid players in the conference, right? Like, they just know what they're doing. Mike Conley is still playing out of his mind. Mike Conley is on my favorite players list. I love watching him play. He's always going to be on my favorite players list. Just is really smart on both sides, right? Like, he makes you pay for mistakes. I watched the OKC game, and there was one play where poor Teo Maledon, right? He's just dribbling the ball, and Conley's trailing him, and Conley just waits for Maledon to get in front of him and just pokes the ball away from behind. It's like that's the stereotypical Mike Conley play, right? But the issue is the same issue they had last time, is that they have very good wing depths. Their wing depth is just small. Like, Royce O'Neal's only 6'4". Royce O'Neal plays like he's like 6'9", but he's 6'4", right? And then you have Joe Ingles, who is somehow still contributing on both ends in a very positive way, but we can't count on that. He's not going to shut down Paul George the same way he did in the Oklahoma City series. That was 4 years ago, right? And then you have or I guess that was 3 years ago technically, but still 3 years in the NBA is a long time. Bojan Bogdanovic, who is no one's idea of a defensive stopper. Here's a Jazz comparison. People are throwing out the 2015 Hawks. I don't like that comparison because it's not the same kind of team. This Jazz team is a supercharged version of that 2018 Pacers team. And obviously, yes, they lost in the first round to LeBron. But this team could also lose in the second round to LeBron, because right now the Lakers are fifth. And if the Lakers beat the Nuggets, which again isn't 100% possibility, but you could have this team going down in flames. But like, Mike Conley is a way better Darren Collison, right? Donovan Mitchell's way better Victor Oladipo. Gobert is like, on offense isn't Miles Turner, but on defense way better than Miles Turner. And then Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Ingles, great wing depth. And then the Pacers didn't obviously have a Royce O'Neal, but you get where I'm coming from. It's not a baseless comparison. I just don't think it's tough, because they could, but I think if they do, it's not because of like any like of how much greater they are than their opponent. 45% of their shots come from behind the 3-point line, Dylan. And that feels low watching them. Like this, it feels like this team shoots more than like last year's Rockets did when it was, the five guys that were all small. It feels like this team shoots just more than those Rockets did generally, but they don't actually, but it feels like they do. I think if this team wins series, it won't be like in the first round. It'll be because they're better than the 8th seed. Like, of course, they're going to be better than Memphis. They're going to be better than Golden State. They're going to be better than New Orleans or San Antonio, right? That shouldn't be shocking. But I think this team, the second round teams, and why don't we just go ahead with this question now? Because you already kind of touched on it. We're going to touch on the percentage chance they beat every team in the Western Conference. So we'll just go team by team, and we'll just rank our percentages. So the Suns, I like their chances a lot more against the Suns. I think I put them at a 60% chance to beat the Suns, because I feel like they have the kind of guys to shut down Booker and Paul. But then you have to remember, Chris Paul can give Rudy Gobert a lot of trouble in pick and roll. So I still think that Utah out-talents Phoenix. And if they play Phoenix, it would be on the conference final. So this matchup is highly unlikely. But Dylan, what % chance do you give the Utah Jazz to beat the Phoenix Suns?
Yeah, I gave them 70 because I just think the 3-point shooting is going to be too much. And as much as I love Phoenix right now, they're one player away from actually being able to beat these teams, I think. And, hopefully that's Ayton next year, but who knows? And yeah, I just think they have way too much offensively, the Jazz, and obviously great defensively too. There's way too much going on. I think the Suns would kind of get overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's kind of what I tend to think too. Like, obviously this matchup is very unlikely to happen unless the Suns fall away to 4 somehow, which I doubt. I don't think the Suns are going to make the conference finals. I think that there's a chance, like, I'm not as high on Dallas as you are, but I think there's a chance Dallas can beat Phoenix in the first round. Like, I think that there's always that possibility, but we're not talking about Phoenix or Dallas right now. So let's go ahead and move on to our next team. And this team isn't very likely to play the Jazz in the second round either, because they're the 3rd seed currently. It's the Los Angeles Clippers. I think I would give the Jazz a slight edge. I gave them a 55% chance because we don't know about the Jazz's health and the areas where you could traditionally dominate the Jazz in. The only advantage the Clippers have to me is Kawhi. I think that the Jazz can do a good job on PG, but Kawhi is the X factor to me, which is why I don't think the Clippers can stop Mitchell and Conley. And I think the pick and roll with those guys, they're going to get a lot of shots that they want. I would favor the Jazz barely. What percent chance do you give the Jazz to beat the Clippers?
Yeah, I gave them 50. It's a toss up because again, the Kawhi and Paul George factor, like I think Royce O'Neal would be fine against one. I think that, I mean, Royce O'Neal's a stud. Like we talked about him earlier in the year a lot, but it's just that you got to have two though. You got to have two Royce O'Neals really. And hopefully one that's a little bit bigger. So that's why I give the Clippers the edge, like you said. But again, it's just everything around those two scares me. Like I think Marcus Morris is going to be fine for 4 games, or like he's going to be the 4 games you need him to be good. I think he could be good. Zubac, man, I just love Zubac, and I know he's Ibaka's not playing right now, and that's who's usually there. And obviously I love Ibaka, but Zubac is a stud. Like he had like 3 insane dunks against the Pacers that just no one talked about. I was watching that game. I'm like, how was that not on SportsCenter? Like he just threw that down effortlessly. And I just love Zubac. Like I think he's the perfect backup center / I need you to start 15 games. Like I think he's perfect for that role. But outside of that, it's like Rondo, who the hell knows? He'll probably have an awesome series because he just does in the playoffs every year now. And Kennard, I mean, unless he's playing the Pacers, he sucks, basically, is what it comes down to. He had another great game against the Pacers. Like, I don't know what it is. He's only good against the Pacers. But everything else, it's like Terrence Mann is like awesome for a week and then terrible the next week. And I don't trust anything outside of those top 2 guys, really.
All right, but Dylan Hughes, can I interest you in Luke Kennard since the trade deadline, since they traded the guy that was directly in front of him?
Let's hear it.
9 points a game, 45% from the field, 40% from 3. He's only playing 20 minutes, but I mean, that's not terrible from old Luke Kennard. Like, I mean, if you can mix in like, he has like a 21-point game, a 17-point game, 15, 11, 10, 17 in the last game against Detroit. Like, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, Lou Williams, I guess I could see that clearing him out would help, but it's give me another like 3 weeks of this, maybe a little bit better scoring, and I'll be on board. But until then, and yes, there's probably some Pacers bias where he becomes the best player in the league against the Pacers. And he was good against Detroit, but that was also probably a revenge game for him. So, we'll see.
All right, let's go ahead and move down to the 4th team in the standings, the Denver Nuggets. They are obviously shorthanded without Jamal Murray. And I think to me, that makes the biggest difference. Like the Jazz were able to do a pretty good job against Michael Porter last year. I think that Gordon element is fascinating, but Gordon needs to start shooting more. And obviously there was no Will Barton last year in the whole playoffs. So I want to see that element too. I have it as a 50-50 shot because it was really close series last year with Murray and with no Murray. I do think the Nuggets are a lot better this year, but I still think that I got to respect the Jazz and make it a 50-50 shot. What do you have as their percentage chance against the Nuggets?
Wow. This is going to be way off from what you said.
Wow.
I'm giving them a 15% chance.
It's interesting.
Listen, I don't care about anything else. It comes down to Gobert versus Jokic. We know who's winning that matchup. There's no way Mitchell plays like that again. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that was the only shot. The only shot they had was because Mitchell was just insanely good. I think he could be good. And again, I'm very open to being wrong. But this is something I talked about last year before the playoffs. Mitchell sucked in the years before last year. So all of a sudden are we just going to say he's awesome because of one series? I don't know. I think they didn't have Conley for like the first 3 games. He had no chance, but like he had no option but to be that guy. So he was that guy. And now they got a full squad, and I don't know. I just, if he is that guy, then yeah, it is closer to 50-50. But I mean, we're just talking about how they defend Kawhi and PG. How are they going to defend Porter and Gordon? Those are two massive guys, and they don't offer the same offensive creation, but just size wise, I mean, give me Porter Jr. over Bogey every day of the week.
Yeah, that's the only thing is for me, like Gary Harris came in and turned that series around, and there is no. I know Gary Harris. Listen, much maligned player for the Denver Nuggets this year, but his defense is still legitimately great. He's playing well in Orlando somehow against the odds. So I think they're going to miss his guard defense. Like, who do they have at the 1 or the 2 that can guard Donovan Mitchell like that? I think it's a legitimate question. Like, Donovan Mitchell's playing out of his mind right now. I think he's improved a lot of the elements of his game, even from last year. So we'll talk about Donovan Mitchell more later. But I think that, listen, even if I was going to push it down, I'd push it down to like a 45% chance Utah wins. I think it's a lot closer. And yes, obviously, Jokic versus Gobert, Jokic wins every single time. I'm not going to dispute that. But I think that the guard, like the rest of the guys for the Utah and Denver, I think that makes it a lot closer, personally. And I think the 3-point variance too is something that the 3-point variance for the Jazz is just something we can't ignore, because they can go like 20 of 49 from 3 and make, outscore you from 40 at the 3-point line. So I can't discount that, Dylan, but I understand where you're coming from for sure. I just don't agree personally, but let's go ahead and move on to the Lakers, and I'll have you start this one because I feel like you're very disrespectfully low on this one.
I mean, listen, I think the Nuggets and the Lakers are the same. Like it's 15%. I don't see how are you going to stop AD, LeBron, Drummond? How? That's all I have to say about it. And again, health is a big deal. I'm just going to assume the Lakers are healthy. I think that's the best way to go about it, because those two guys have missed a lot of time already. Like I would be surprised if in another month they're not back. They may be rusty, but even when they're rusty, and we already know what LeBron thinks about Utah. He has no love for Utah. If he's going to show out against anyone, I think it's Utah.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I was factoring in health, so I had 35%, but if they're healthy, I'm giving the Jazz 10% chance. I mean, that's the only, I'm legitimately worried about the health of Anthony Davis. LeBron, I'm never worried about because, again, he's a fucking superhuman. But Anthony Davis, if he's not healthy, then I think the pendulum swings a little more towards the Jazz. Do I think it swings all the way? No, but I think it could swing more towards the Jazz. But I think that healthy Lakers destroy the West. There's just no team as good as the Lakers healthy, but the Lakers haven't been healthy, and that's why basketball is played. You don't just no one plays on paper, as I say. Let's go ahead and move on to the Portland Trailblazers. And I had this at 60%, but I'm putting this at a 70% chance because Portland, listen, we both love the Trailblazers. We both love Damian Lillard. They have one of the worst fucking defenses I've ever seen. I'm sorry. Like, who is going to guard Donovan Mitchell? A. B. Robert Covington, for as good as he is, he's not a magic worker. He can't be at all 4 spots on the perimeter at once. And I think that that's just going to tear the Trailblazers to shreds if the Jazz play. And I think if the Jazz play the Blazers in a series, I think there's a legitimate shot that the Jazz could shoot 45% from the 3 in the series because they're going to be that wide open every single time. I love the Blazers roster, but they just don't have the defensive dogs. That's Portland's problem to me. And we both like the Gary Trent for Norm Powell trade, but man, Gary Trent at least played good defense. At least I could throw Gary Trent on Donovan Mitchell and be like, okay, this probably isn't preferable, but I'll take it rather than CJ McCollum on Donovan Mitchell. I almost said Davion, still in the Final Four mindset. You could say who on the Portland roster, Dylan Hughes, can guard Donovan Mitchell? Just answer that one question.
I mean, I think Robert Covington could guard anyone in the league, but again, at that point, then just give the ball to everyone else and you're fine.
Right. So So, okay, I'll just ask, what % chance do you have of the Jazz beating the Trailblazers?
Yeah, I gave it 72 or 70 as well, I should say, not 72. It's just, again, put this Blazers roster in the Hall of Fame for me. Like, I feel like on 2K, it'd be a great team to play with. Pretty much love everyone on the team, but it's just, I obviously have the health questions I talked about earlier. And I don't have anything really to say because you said it all with their defense, but I do want to give a quick shout out to Gary Trent. Like, I can't hold it in. 17 of 19 from the field last week. Give the man some love, okay? And he also hit a game winner. I feel like I started the Gary Trent fan club when we talked about the Blazers or whatever a month ago at this point. Gary Trent, okay? And I like that trade for Portland. I love Norm Powell as well. Gary Trent, man, he's on his way.
Man, Gary Trent could not have ended in a more perfect place than my Toronto Raptors.
Exactly.
I think it's perfect for this podcast because we both love the Raptors, me more than you. I feel comfortable saying I love the Raptors more than you do. But I think that they kind of did as well as they could without getting a draft pick in that trade. Like, that's the absolute best case scenario without getting a draft pick for Norm Powell. And I know draft picks are all the rage, but when you can get a guy like Gary Trent Jr., you got to do it. And the Raptors did a great job. Like, Masai, that's why he's the best. Because he could turn. Norm Powell was definitely leaving in the offseason. So he turned chicken shit into chicken salad. So shout out to Masai, our last team. And this team is very unlikely to play Utah. But let's just say they lose in the first play-in game, and somehow this team ends up as the 8th seed. The Dallas Mavericks. What % chance do you give the Jazz of beating the Mavericks?
50%. You know how I feel about the Mavericks. I don't care what's happened in the regular season. And I'm being a total hypocrite because I'm basing this completely off of one series last year while I just trashed Donovan Mitchell and said he's not going to do the same thing. But I don't care. I can be a hypocrite. This is half of this podcast is mine. Okay. So I'm going to take my half and be a hypocrite.
Hold on. Your percentage of the podcast is whatever Luka's shooting from the field right now. So this could come back to really bite me in the ass, but continue.
Exactly. And hey, we're coming off of a great game winner from Luka. So I feel like this is a great time to talk about the Mavs. But listen, man, if they were healthy last year, they would have beat the Clippers. I'm going to drive that in the ground. They almost did it without Porzingis anyway. So, and hell, if we want to talk about injuries, Porzingis could very well get hurt. He gets hurt every year, and he has been hurt this year, but again, very, very susceptible to injury. So I'm not going to act like that's not out of the question, but I just think this team is better than last year. It feels like Josh Richardson's kind of finally fitting in. I still don't think it's as seamless as a fit as I expected it to be at the beginning of the year, but part of the problem is that he just plays with Luka too much. I think if he played more bench minutes by himself, it'd be a lot better. But if you have Porzingis out there, what does Gobert do? He has to stay away from the rim, right? He has to, because Porzingis, when he's hot, he's hot. You can't just leave him out there. And that's the thing about Dallas is they can completely space you out. Because if they play Porzingis at the 5, or Kleba, Kleba's going to be out on the perimeter. Everyone is. And then, so you're giving all that lane space to Luka and all those shooters out there. You can talk about Utah shooting all you want, and that's very valid. They're, probably the best 3-point shooting team in the league right now. They could space you out too completely outside of Gobert, but Luka with 4 shooters next to him, I'm gonna give them a great chance, and I'm not gonna give them the edge, but I would be surprised if they didn't go 7 if everyone's healthy.
Yeah, so I don't think Dallas is falling to 8. First of all, I think that Luka in a one game to get the 7 seed is going to get the 7 seed. Although And I think I really like Dallas. After watching more and more Dallas, I really like Dallas's chances against Phoenix. I don't know why. Listen, this is one area where you and I diverge. I'm nowhere near as high on Dallas as you are, but that's just because you're really high on Dallas. You really love them. Like they're your Mavericks. Let's make that clear. By the way, it's 48.6% your podcast and then 51. I'm just kidding. It's below.
We'll go to court over that, sir.
I give the Jazz a 60% chance of beating the Mavericks. I just don't trust the Mavs defense enough. But Luka and Kristaps intrigues me very much against the Jazz because that's the exact combination that the Lakers have, but worse in LeBron and AD. And Luka and Kristaps can stretch the floor. And I want to see, yeah, you're right. I want to see Gobert defend in space. Obviously, again, this series is very unlikely to happen. I will add that caveat a couple more times. But man, Luka would torch this Jazz defense because as good as O'Neal is and as good as Ingles is, I think Ingles could actually provide some problems for Luka. But no one is like, listen, if Kawhi, PG, and Marcus Morris couldn't shut down Luka in last year's playoffs, I'm just starting to think no one can. So, and again, we're basing it off one series, but the one series from Luka had a lot different circumstances than the one series from Donovan Mitchell. So we're not going to talk about the Grizzlies because let's face it, it's 100% chance the Jazz beat the Grizzlies in the first round. I don't think there's any dispute there. So let's go ahead and move on to what was supposed to be our second big picture question, but now is our last. And for Donovan Mitchell's future development, this is last year of his rookie contract, and he's still very young in the league. But do you think for his future development, do you think it's more important that his pull-up jumper gets better or that his passing vision gets better?
So this is a very easy question for me to answer because I think pull-up shooting for a ball handler is the most important trait you can have because a pull-up shooter opens up everything. It opens up everything. And my example, aside from, maybe Steph Curry, I think Steph Curry has proven that having a pull-up jumper is pretty good. But look at Victor Oladipo when he was shooting well to when he's not. When the first half season he was with the Pacers, when he was hitting, 40% from three for the first time in his career, he was playing so well because he was using that pull-up jump shot to get defenders up in the air and just drive right past him. And ever since then, when his shot has come back to earth, he hasn't had the same efficiency because the shots he wants at the rim are heavily contested because there's more defenders in the way. No one is going for that pull-up jump shot because they know he's not going to hit it at a good level. And so if you have a pull-up jump shot, you don't need to have a great passing vision. It's just going to be a lot easier to pass naturally. You're going to have no defender in your face because they're behind you at the three-point line. And you're probably going to have a bunch of help defenders rushing to you. So you're just going to have at least one guy open. So it's not even going to – you don't need elite passing vision because you don't need to create passes. They're just going to be there naturally because you've scrambled the defense. And this is why I always talk about this with guards. Pull-up shooting and penetration. If you have those two things, you're set because you're going to have help defenders scrambling. And when you have help defenders scrambling, someone's open. So as long as you're able to find that open guy, then you're going to get a wide open three every time.
All right, so here's a question for you. So right now, I have NBA.com/stats pulled up. And on pull-up jumpers, Donovan Mitchell is taking 5.43 pull-up threes a game. He's making 36% of them. And on the whole, he is taking 10 pull-ups a game, is making about 40% of them. So obviously, the threes comprise a good majority of those pull-ups. What percent from three? What percent in general and what percent from three would you say Donovan Mitchell needs to be at for him to be better? It feels like the pull-up jumper is pretty good for Donovan Mitchell at this point. I feel like it's almost there. But what percentage do you feel like it needs to be at for him to be at that upper echelon of guards?
It's definitely very close. And honestly, 36% from three is not bad. Obviously, the higher, the better. If he could get to 38 or 39, he would be one of the best guards in the league, undoubtedly. Because if you're hitting at that rate, then you're getting easy looks at the rim every single time. So you're either knocking down pull-up threes at a very good rate, or you have 4 defenders in front of you instead of 5. And so he's pretty close, but again, 36 is not bad. And 40%, again, a lot of that is represented by the threes. And I would love to see just a pure 2% or a 2-point percentage on that. But I mean, I think a good 2-point percentage in general for jumpers is like upper 40s. If you're upper 40s, you're great. So I would imagine that he's probably not far off of that, because the 3-point will knock it down pretty low. But I mean, just from the eye test, I don't think he's far away. And like, look at what we saw in the playoffs last year. That explosion was him hitting pull-up jump shots. So that just shows right there what it can do for his game. And I think this year we've seen a lot of that too. So yeah, I think he's probably pretty close.
So Damian Lillard right now is the leader in 3-point pull-up attempts per game. 8.3, making 35%. James Harden, 6.8, 35%. Luka Doncic, 6.6, 37.6%. Steph Curry, not fucking human, 41.8% on 6.5 attempts a game. And of course, right? Like, of course.
Yeah, of course.
CJ, only 29 games, but 37.4% on 6.3 attempts a game. I mean, so the 2-point percentage for Donovan on pull-ups is 43%. Pretty good. Like, I mean, could be a little better. But I also would like to see, like, this obviously doesn't detail like zones or anything. I'd like to see like top of the key, the circle area. I think he's pretty close. And you're right. The pull-up jumper does unlock a lot. Try saying that 10 times fast. But I think he's almost there, Dylan. Like, I think that Donovan Mitchell can be a top 20 player. I think he's really damn close. And I think obviously playing with Gobert unlocks a lot for him, right? Because you get the vertical threat. But man, making 35% of your pull-up threes is pretty good. I feel like, or 36%, excuse me. I think he's doing pretty well, Dylan. I think he's almost there in terms of being a superstar. Not like maybe full-fledged by like Harden or something, but like next tier down, right? I think he's really close.
Yeah, and I mean, I just talked about how unlikely it is for him to have a playoff series like last year, but if he does, or at least it's just good. I mean, if he's like near 30 points, I mean, that's huge, because look at the opinion of Jokic, how it changed based on that series against the Blazers a few years ago. I mean, it was very clear that he was the only one in that series that was keeping him in it. And that's where he gained respect around the league. And that's what it does. And like, the playoffs are everything. I mean, I'm at a point, especially with all the resting, I don't care what happens in the regular season anymore. Like, the best teams in the league, especially the Nets, which, to be fair, they have like everyone on their team is over 30 pretty much, but they're resting half their roster every night. So it's like, I'm not going to take away anything from their regular season. And it's mostly the Nets doing that, so I shouldn't act like it's an everyone thing. But the playoffs, that's it. Like, that's what matters. And if Mitchell can have another good postseason, again, it doesn't have to be like last year, but just have a really solid postseason, then I think it would kind of catapult him into that next tier for me and probably a lot of other people.
I think that's a good way to close it off. Dylan Hughes, thank you so much. This was a long one because we had a lot to cover, but I think this one was probably one of our best ones, and that's saying something. Like, I feel like I say that every week, but I really, really think we had a good show today, even though this currently, I believe we're at the hour 59 mark. So listen, Dylan Hughes, you did 2 long podcasts this week between this and Divine Rhyme. Tell us how Divine Rhyme episode 2 was about Cole World and Born Sinner.
Yeah, so man, I'm clocking in at over 4 hours of podcast this week. When you throw JD's in there, just gets me right over this. So I'm putting my time in this week. But yeah, Divine Rhyme, man, like, really 2 episodes in, it feels like we've been talking about this stuff for months. Like, me and Will have a great chemistry, and like the first 2 episodes, every time we finish up, we're just both giddy. because it just is very free flowing conversation and really good. And yeah, I think this week was really good. Last week I think we talked a lot more about the life lessons that we kind of had from ourselves. But this week the music was so good. We talked for over an hour just about Born Sinner. I think it was an hour 20 on Born Sinner. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a really fun week. I think we did a great job breaking the songs down, and I had a great time this week.
Listen, I don't remember a whole lot of shows' second episodes. Hell, I don't remember a whole lot of shows' first episodes. We've been doing this for like a year now. And Linsanity came out. It's been almost a year since the first Linsanity, which was the first other show on our network. But for the first 2 episodes, and I'm not just speaking here because, you know, I have a very vested interest in this. I thought that they were 2 of the best first episodes you could ask for. It really covered all the bases. And yes, the Divine Rhyme was as long as this episode was, but I think that you guys really covered all the bases you need to cover. And I thought it was really well done. So make sure you check out Divine Rhyme. The one area that I wish Will had done, and I know Will doesn't know that this is expected of him, but Dylan, you know it's coming. Listen, from one young soul to another. Dylan, how much does it cost to buy the book?
$7 paperback, $5 for the ebook.
Are you telling me you don't have $7, bro? Come on, man. Like, seriously? Like, dude, I'm just sick of it, man. I'm gonna go into your house. I'm going to take every other shoe you have. You're not gonna have any pairs anymore. You're only gonna have left-footed shoes. Okay? I'm sick of this shit. All right? Buy the goddamn book. Listen, Dylan, you agree. It would be very inconvenient for you only to have left shoes and no pairs.
That just hit me so hard. I was like, man, I mean, $7 for the price of having both shoes. I can't think of a better deal.
I mean, like, listen, and it'll cost you a lot more than that. And listen, I don't even think you can buy a single shoe. I think you have to buy a pair. Like, listen, it's not that hard. Just buy the goddamn book. Come on now. I'm asking you to support the family here, you know. I'm not asking you to do a whole lot. So, and then Dylan Hughes, you're very active on the YouTubes nowadays. Life with Dylan, right? That's the name with the YouTube channel. So
yes.
Make sure, a lot of stuff going on there. The newsletter, Dylan Hughes, very original name, very original. Make sure you subscribe to that as well. And our other stuff on the Running Hook Podcast Network as well. We got a lot of stuff. Zach is going to have a very busy week this week. He was back with Falcon and the Winter Soldier by himself because I was on a little bit of a snafu. So he was back with another director's commentary. So make sure you check that out. He's back with Road to Fast 9 with Bryce Shaddy and Devin Foss. Fast 4, which is considered the worst installment of the franchise. The clip I posted on Twitter today has Devin Voss saying the plot sucks. So, you know, very complimentary. And then he is going to do not favorite movies. He's doing favorite movies with Dylan Hughes sometime in the future, it sounds like. So that'll be fun. Dylan, it sounds like, since like Zach says you haven't picked your movie yet. So I think you have your favorite movie, Dylan Hughes.
I actually have decided earlier today what I'm going to do. I haven't talked to Zach yet, but I have made my decision. So that'll hopefully be on the schedule pretty soon.
Give us the reveal, Dylan Hughes. We don't want Zach to have it. I want to have it before Zach has it.
So, you know, I was thinking, because I had a final group. I'm like, what would be the best discussion? And listen, man, it's Parasite, okay? I'm not a huge subtitles guy because I don't want to have to read when I'm watching a movie. But man, come on. Parasite is one of the best movies ever made. I don't care what anyone has to say. Probably some recency bias in there. But listen, man, that was just a beautifully done, very unique. I always like the unique movies. Very unique movie. So I'm going with Parasite. Great choice.
I'll tell Zach to fast forward to the end of the podcast to find out what your favorite movie is. I'll give you that satisfaction, Dylan. And then also, I wanted to get that out of the way. He also, Zach is recording right now, I believe, with Ryan Gregory, Devin Voss, and Bryce Shaddy. They're doing a sports movie draft. So that should be fun to see how the limits of sports movie is stretched in that podcast. Linsanity is taking a little bit of a hiatus right now. Caleb is going to be back with NBA coverage, and then he's also going to do a NFL draft crossover with Triple Option Pass. Speaking of Triple Option Pass, back this week with offensive prospects, Dylan Hughes We bashed Justin Fields, but could you imagine someone taking Mac Jones over Justin Fields? I know you're not like the world's biggest Justin Fields fan, but even you have to be insulted by that notion.
Okay, well here I'm not going to say I've come around on Justin Fields completely, but if he goes to San Francisco, he's going to be awesome. I have no doubts about that. Look at what Shanahan did for Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan was so close to being MVP, Super Bowl same year. So close. And that was purely because of Shanahan. I mean, that was very clearly I've liked Matt Ryan for a long time, but I mean, he was never that good and he hasn't been since, and he probably never will be. Mac Jones, I think Mac Jones would be fine there too, but you don't freaking trade up to 3 to get that guy. You trade up to 3 to get Justin Fields. Like, Justin Fields is not going to slip. And I think Justin Fields is a little bit overrated, but I still think he can be a fine quarterback. And getting in the San Francisco system, he would be great, I think.
And that's a beautiful way to put it. Dylan Hughes is not on Triple Option Pass, but if you want some amazing draft coverage, go make sure you check out Triple Option Pass. They'll be back next week with defensive prospects, so that'll be fun. And then Battleground, they'll be back sometime in the future. Who knows at this point? There's a lot of balls in there. And I think that's everything I wanted to touch on. So Dylan Hughes, once again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, stamping this on yet again in a time-honored tradition of the Power Hour, forgetting to say our teams while we're recording the main pod. Our teams for the next week are the Bucks, who we skipped this week, the Detroit Pistons, who we talked about earlier, a lot of Central Division teams the last couple of weeks, Dylan Hughes, and then the teams whose defense we absolutely ripped to shreds, the Portland Trailblazers. So, folks, that's going to be an exciting time. Make sure you check out those teams, and thanks again for listening.